Hi learners! When a researcher intends to do an in-depth study, the interview method is used. In this method, the researcher directly asks open-ended questions to the respondent on a particular topic. It helps the researcher to understand the attitudes, behaviors, opinions, and motivations of the respondents. The interview method is a very difficult method and is also a time-consuming process. It requires high level of skills on the researcher's part because sometimes the respondents are unwilling to reply on personal and sensitive issues. There are many types of interviews. The first is the structured interview. In this case, questions are prepared well in advance and the language and sequence remains the same for all the respondents. The next is the unstructured interview. In this case, the researcher starts with the broad questions. Questions, language, and sequence is not the same for all the respondents. Sometimes the researcher has to include new questions on the spot, depending on the response of the respondent. This method is widely used in the qualitative research. The next is semi-structured interviews. Questions are prepared in advance and they are put in a sequence. However, the researcher may change the sequence for different respondents depending on the situation. He has the flexibility to change the language of the questions to a certain extent. The next is group interviews. In this method, the researcher conducts the interviews in a group. The same question is asked to all the respondents in a group and usually they answer it one by one. No discussion takes place among the group members. The sole purpose of the group interview is to save time. This method should not be treated at par with the focus group method. The next is the telephonic interview. In this case, the interview is conducted using a telephone. The advantages of the interview method are: it helps in gaining in-depth knowledge of the topic. The researcher can obtain true responses. It is possible to obtain the responses on personal issues when the rapport is built. And lastly, the researcher may have additional information on the topic which may further be used in the research. The disadvantages of the interview method are: the researcher may exert his influence on the respondent. It is very time-consuming. If the researcher is not trained, the method may not be useful. It allows the researcher to draw biased conclusions. And sometimes the respondents are not comfortable on personal questions. Let's now discuss the interview process. The interview process usually follows 5 steps. The first is the introduction. In the first stage, the researcher introduces himself to the respondent and tries to build a rapport with him. The next is objectives of the interview. In the second stage, the respondent is made aware about the objectives of the interview. The third is initiating the interview. Here, the interviewer asks questions to the respondent. General questions are asked first, followed by specific and difficult questions. The researcher starts recording the interview. The next is providing help. During the interview, the researcher provides help to the respondents if the questions are difficult. The last is conclusion. The interview is concluded by saying thanks to the respondent. So learners, this was about the interview method.